Hello. Welcome to episode 14 of our Tuesday Tales of Terror. Oh my god. Alright, excuse me. One moment, please. I just let you in. You cried to come in 30 seconds ago. Thank you. Yes, okay. Wonderful. Drink some water, get cozy, and settle in. And today we are reading chapters 17 and 18, which, let's see. And where did we leave our young lads? We're at Notre Dame. And we just built Notre Dame. Okay. Chapter 17. Jehoshaphat, said Tom Skelton on the parapet. We whistled all the stone griffins and demons here. Now Pipkin's lost again. I was thinking, why can't we just whistle him? Mountraud laughed so his cape boomed on the night wind, and his dry bones jangled inside his skin. Boys, look around. He's still here. Where? Here, mourned a small, faraway voice. The boys crickled their spines, looking over the parapet, cracked their necks, staring up. Look and find, lads. Hide and seek. And even in seeking, they could not help but enjoy once more the turbulent slates of the cathedral, all fringed with horrors and deliciously ugly with trapped beasts. Where was Pipkin among all those dark sea creatures with gills gaped open like mouths for an eternal gasp and sigh? Where among all those lovely chiseled nightmares cut from the gallstones of night lurks and monsters cracked out of old earthquakes, vomited up from mad volcanoes which cooled themselves to frights and deliriums? Here, wailed a small, frail, familiar voice again, and way down on a ledge, halfway to the earth, the boys, squinting, thought they saw one small, round, beautiful angel devil face with a familiar eye, a familiar nose, a friendly and familiar mouth. Pipkin! Shouting, they ran down stairways along dark corridors until they reached a ledge. Far out there on the windy air, above a very narrow walkway indeed, was that small face, lovely among so much ugliness. Tom went first, not looking down, spread-eagling himself. Ralph followed. The rest inched along in a line. Watch out, Tom! Don't fall! I'm not falling. Here's Pip. And there he was, standing in a line directly under the outthrust stone mask, the bust, the head of a gargoyle. They looked up at that mighty fine profile, that great nub nose, that unbearded cheek, that fuzzy cap of marbled hair. Pipkin. Pip, for crying! What you doing here? Called Tom. Pip said nothing. His mouth was cut stone. Aw, it's just rock, said Ralph. Just a gargoyle, carved here a long time ago. Looks like Pipkin. No, I heard him. I heard him call. But how? And then the wind gave the answer. It blew around the high corners of Notre Dame. It fluted in the ears and piped out the gaping mouths of the gargoyles. Whispered Pipkin's voice, and here we have an illustration of Pipkin trapped as a gargoyle. Yes. The hair stood up on the backs of their necks, terrifying. Ooh, murmured the stone mouth. Listen, there it is, said Ralph excitedly. Shut up, cried Tom. Pip, next time the wind blows, tell us how do we help? What got you here? How do we get you down? Silence. The boys clung to the rock cliff face of the great cathedral. Then another swoop of wind sucked by, drew their breaths, and whistled in the carved stone boy's teeth. "One," said Pip's voice. "Question," whispered Pip's voice again after a pause. Silence. More wind. "Ada." The boys waited. "Time." "One question at a time," translated Tom. The boys hooted with laughter. That was Pip all right. "Okay." Tom gathered his spit. "What are you doing up here?" The wind blew sadly, and the voice spoke as from deep in an old well. "Been so many places in just a few hours." The boys waited, grinding their teeth. "Speak up, Pipkin." The wind came back to mourn in the open stone mouth, but the wind had died. It began to rain, and this was best of all, for the raindrops ran cold in Pipkin's stone ears and out along his nose, and fountained from his marble mouth, so that he began to utter syllables in liquid tongues with clear, cold, rainwater words. "Hey, this is better." He spouted mist. He sprayed quick rain. "You should have been where I've been. Gosh, I was buried for a mummy. I was trapped in a dog. We guessed that was you, Pipkin. And now here," said the rain in the ear, the rain in the nose, the rain in the clear, dripping marble mouth. "Gosh, golly, funny, strange, inside this rock with all these devils and demons for pals. And 10 minutes from now, who knows where I'll be? Higher up or buried deep?" "Where, Pipkin?" The boys jostled. The rain squalled and beat them so they almost tilted and fell off the ledge. "Are you dead, Pipkin?" "No, not yet," said the cold rain in his mouth. "Part of me in a hospital, a long way off home. Part of me in that old Egyptian tomb. Part of me in the grass in England. Part of me here. Part of me in a worse place." "Where?" "I don't know. Oh, gosh. One minute I'm yelling laughs. The next I'm scared. Just now, this very minute, I guess I know I'm scared. Help me, guys. Help me. Oh, please." Rain poured out his eyes like tears. The boys reached up to touch Pipkin's chin as best they could, but before they could touch, a lightning bolt struck out of the sky. It flashed blue and white. The entire cathedral shook. The boys had to grab demons' horns and angels' wings on either side so as not to be knocked off. Thunder and smoke and a great scattering of rock and stone. Pipkin's face was gone. Knocked off by the lightning bolt, it fell down through space to shatter on the ground below. "Pipkin!" But there below, on the cathedral porch stones, were only flinty fire sparks blowing away and a fine gargoyle dust. They saw something like a spirit smoke, a bloom of gunpowder blow drifting south and west. "Mexico," moaned Shroud, one of the few men in all the world who knew how to utter the word. "Mexico?" asked Tom. "The last grand travel of this night," said Moundshroud, still uttering, savoring the syllables. "Whistle, boys, scream like tigers, cry like panthers, shriek like carnivore. Scream, cry, shriek, reassemble the kite, lads, the kite of autumn. Paste back the fangs and fiery eyes and bloody talons. Yell the wind to sew it all together, and ride us high and long and last. Bray, boys, whimper, trumpet, shout." The boys hesitated. Moundshroud ran along the ledge like someone racketing a picket fence. He knocked each boy with his knee and elbow. The boys fell, and falling gave each his particular whimper, shriek, or scream. Plummeting down through cold space, they felt the tail of a murderous peacock flourish beneath all blood-filled eye. 10,000 burning eyes came up, hovered suddenly round a windy corner of gargoyles. The autumn kite, freshly assembled, broke their fall. They grabbed, they held to rim, to edge, to cross struts, to trap drum rattling papers, to bits and tatters and shreds of old meat-breath lion mouth and stale blood tiger's maw. Moundshroud leaped up to grab. This time he was the tail. The autumn kite hovered, waiting, 8 boys upon its billowing surf of teeth and eyes. Moundshroud turned his ear. Hundreds of miles away, beggars ran down Irish roads, starving, asking for food from door to door. Their cries rose in the night. Fred Fryer, in his beggar's costume, heard. "That way! Let's fly there!" "No time. Listen!" Thousands of miles away there was a faint tap-hammering of death-watch beetles ticking the night. "The coffin makers of Mexico," Moundshroud smiled. "In the streets with their long buckets and nails and little hammers, tapping, tapping." "Pipkin?" whispered the boys. "We hear," said Moundshroud. "And to Mexico we go." The autumn kite boomed them away on a 1,000-foot tidal wave of wind. The gargoyles, fluting in their stone nostrils, gaping their marble lips, used that same wind to wail them farewell. Chapter 18. They hung above Mexico. They hung above an island in that lake in Mexico. They heard dogs barking in the night far below. They saw a few boats on the moonlit lake moving like water insects. They heard a guitar playing and a man singing in a high, sad voice. A long way off across the dark borders of land in the United States, packs of children, mobs of dogs ran laughing, barking, knocking from door to door, their hands full of sweet bags of treasure, wild with joy on Halloween night. "But here," whispered Tom. "Hear what?" asked Moundshroud, hovering at his elbow. Oh, I hear." "And down through all of South America?" "Yes, South. Here in South, all the cemeteries, all the graveyards are full of candlelight." Tom thought. 1,000 candles in the cemetery, 100 candles in that graveyard, 10,000 small flickering lights farther up on 100 miles, 5,000 miles, down to the very tip of Argentina. "Is that the way they celebrate?" "El Dia de los Muertos. How's your grade school Spanish, Tom?" "The Day of the Dead Ones? Caramba, sí. Kite, disassemble." Swooping down, the kite flew apart for a final time. The boys tumbled on the stony shore of the quiet lake. Mists hung over the waters. Far across the lake they could see an unlit tomb yard. There were as yet no candles burning in it. Out of the mists, a dugout canoe moved silently without oars, as if the tide touched it across the waters. A tall figure in a gray winding sheet stood motionless in one end of the boat. The boat nudged the grassy shore softly. The boys gasped, for as far as they could tell, only darkness was cupped inside the hood of the shrouded figure. Mr. Moundshroud?" They knew it had to be him, but he said nothing. Only the faintest firefly of a grin flickered within the cowl. A bony hand gestured. The boys tumbled into the boat. "Shh!" whispered a voice from the empty hood. The figure gestured again, and touched by wind they blew across the dark waters under a night sky filled with the billion never-before-seen fires of the stars. Far off on that dark island there was a prickle of guitar sound. A single candle was lit in the graveyard. Somewhere someone blew a musical sound on a flute. Another candle was lit among the tombstones. Someone sang a single word of a song. A third candle was touched to life by a flaming match. And the faster the boat moved, the more guitar notes sounded, and the more candles were lit high among the mounds on the stony hills. 12, 100, 1,000 candles flared until it looked as if the great Andromeda star cluster had fallen out of the sky and tilted itself to rest here in the middle of almost midnight Mexico. The boat struck the shore. The boys, surprised, fell out. They spun about, but Moundshroud was gone. Only his winding sheet lay empty in the boat. A guitar called to them. A voice sang to them. A road like a river of white stones and white rocks led up through the town that was like a graveyard to the graveyard that was like a town. For there were no people in the town. The boys reached the low wall of the graveyard and then the huge lacework iron gates. They took hold of the iron rungs and stared in. "What?" gasped Tom. "I've never seen the like." For now they knew why the town was empty, because the graveyard was full. By every grave was a woman kneeling to place gardenias, or azaleas, or marigolds in a frame upon the stone. By every grave knelt a daughter who was lighting a new candle, or lighting a candle that had just blown out. By every grave was a quiet boy with bright brown eyes, and in one hand a small papier-mâché funeral parade glued to a shingle, and in the other hand a papier-mâché skeleton head which rattled with rice or nuts inside. "Look," Tom whispered. There were hundreds of graves. There were hundreds of women. There were hundreds of daughters. There were hundreds of sons, and hundreds upon thousands of candles. The whole graveyard was one swarm of candle shine, as if a population of fireflies had heard of a grand conglomeration and had flown here to settle in and flame upon the stones and light the brown faces and the dark eyes and the black hair. "Boy," said Tom, half to himself. "At home we never go to the graveyard, except maybe Memorial Day, once a year, and then at high noon, full sun, no fun. This is fun." "Sure," yelled everyone. "Mexican Halloweens are better than ours." For in every grave were plates of cookies shaped like funeral priests, or skeletons, or ghosts, waiting to be nibbled by living people, or by ghosts that might come along toward dawn, hungry and forlorn. No one knew, no one said, and each boy inside the graveyard, next to his sister and mother, put down the miniature funeral on the grave, and they could see the tiny candy person inside the tiny wooden coffin, placed before a tiny altar with tiny candles, and around the tiny coffin stood tiny altar boys with peanuts for heads and eyes painted on the peanut shells, and before the altar stood a priest with a corn nut for a head and a walnut for a stomach, and on the altar was a photograph of the person in the coffin, a real person once, remembered now. "Better and still better," whispered Ralph. "Cuervos," sang a far voice up the hill. Inside the graveyard, voices echoed the song. Leaning against the graveyard walls, some with guitars in their hands or bottles, were the men of the village. "Cuervos de los muertos," sang the faraway voice. "Cuervos de los muertos," sang the men in the shadows inside the gate. "Skulls," translated Tom. "The skulls of the dead." Skulls. Sweet sugar skulls, sweet candy skulls, the skulls of the dead ones, sang the voice, coming close now. And down the hill, treading softly in shadow, came a hunchbacked vendor of skulls. "No, not hunched," said Tom half aloud. "A whole load of skulls on his back," cried Ralph. "Sweet skulls, sweet white crystal sugar candy skulls, sang the vendor, his face hidden under a vast sombrero. But it was Moundshroud's voice that sweetly piped. And carried from a long bamboo over his shoulder, hung on black threads, were dozens and scores of sugar skulls, as big as their own heads, and each skull was inscribed, names. Excuse me, it's Moundshroud. It should be much deeper. Names, names, sang the old vendor. Tell me your name, I give you your skull. Tom, said Tom. The old man plucked forth a skull. On it in huge letters was written, Tom. Tom took and held his own name, his own sweet edible skull in his fingers. Ralph! And a skull with the name Ralph written on it was tossed forth. Ralph caught it, laughing. In a swift game the bony hand plucked, tossed white skull after skull sweetly on the cool air. Henry, Hank, Fred, George, Hackles, J.J., Wally! The boys bombarded, squealed, and danced about, pelted with their own skulls and their own proud names, sugar encrusted upon each white brow of those skulls. They caught and almost dropped this splendid bombardment. They stood, mouths wide open, staring at the sugary death sweets in their gummy hands, and from within the graveyard, way high, male soprano voices sang, Roberto, Maria, Conchita, Tomas, Calavera, Calavera, sweet candy bones to eat. I swear to God, if this doesn't rhyme, I'm going to be pissed. Okay, it does kind of rhyme. Let's start over. Calavera, Calavera, sweet candy bones to eat, your name on the snow-white sweet skull. You hurry down the street. You buy from the piled high white hills in the square, buy and eat. Chew your name, what a treat. The boys lifted the sweet skulls in their fingers. I hate it. Bite the T and the O and the M. Tom. Chew the H. Swallow A. Digest N. Choke on K. Hank. Sounds terrible. Their mouths watered, but was it poison they held? Would you guess such happiness, such joy, as each boy dines on darkness? Makes a meal of the night. What a delight. Snap a bite. Go ahead, munch that fine candy head. The boys tapped the sweet candy names to their lips and were about to bite when, Olé! A mob of Mexican boys ran up, yelling their names, seizing at skulls. Tomas! And Tom saw Tomas run off with his name's skull. Hey, said Tom, he sort of looked like me. Did he? Said the vendor of skulls. Enrique! Shouted a small boy, seizing Henry Hick's skull. Enrique pelted down the hill. He looked like me, said Henry Hank. He did, said Moundshroud. Quick, boys, see what they're up to. Hold on to your sweet craniums and get. The boys jumped, for at that very moment an explosion hit the streets below, in the town, then another explosion, and another. Fireworks! The boys took a last look at the flowers, the graves, cookies, food, skulls upon graves, miniature funerals with miniature bodies in coffins, at candles, crouched women, lonely boys, girls, men, then whirled and exploded down the hill toward the firecrackers. Quick pause here. I just wonder, when did the boys go from being with the girls and the women at the tombs to being these sad, lonely men standing by the gate with their guitars and their bottles? Like, at what point do you transition and say, I'm not going to chill with the women at the grave anymore. It's time for me to pick up my guitar and go stand by the gate. Anyway. Into the plaza, Tom and Ralph and all the other costumed boys raced, panting. They jolted to a halt. They jolted to a halt and danced about as 1,000 miniature firecrackers banged around their shoes. The lights were on. Suddenly the shops were open, and Tomas and Jose Juan and Enrique were lighting and tossing the firecrackers with yells. "Hey, Tom, from me, Tomas!" Tom saw his own eyes glinting from the wild boy's face. "Hey, Enrique, this is from Enrique, bang! JJ, this, bang, from Jose Juan!" "Oh, this is the best Halloween of all," said Tom. And it was, for never in all their wild travels had so much happened to be seen, smelled, and touched. In every alley and door and window were mounds of sugar skulls with beautiful names. From every alley came the tap-tap of death-watch beetle coffin makers nailing, hammering, tapping coffin lids like wooden drums in the night. On every corner were stacks of newspapers with pictures of the mayor and his body painted in like a skeleton, or the president and his body all bones, or the loveliest maiden dressed like a xylophone, and death playing a tune on her musical ribs. "Calavera, calavera, calavera," the song drifted down the hill. "See the politicians buried in the news. Rest in peace beneath their names, such is fame. See the skeletons juggling, standing high on each other's shoulders. Preaching sermons, wrestling, playing soccer. Little runners, little jumpers, little skeletons that leap about and fall. Did you ever dream that death could be whittled down so very small?" And the song was true. Wherever the boys looked were the miniature acrobats, trapeze performers, basketball players, priests, jugglers, tumblers, but all were skeletons, hand to hand, bony shoulder to shoulder, and all small enough for you to carry in your fingers. And over there in a window was a whole microscopic jazz band with a skeleton trumpeter and a skeleton drummer and a skeleton playing a tuba no bigger than a soup spoon and a skeleton conductor with a bright cap on his head and a baton in his hand and tiny music pouring out of the tiny horns. Never before had the boys seen so many bones. "Bones!" laughed everyone. "Oh, lovely bones!" Same. The song began to fade. "Hold the dark holiday in your palms. Bite it, swallow it, and survive. Come out the far black tunnel of El Dia de Muerte and be glad, oh so glad, you are alive. Calavera, calavera." I'm doing my best here. The newspapers, bordered in black, blew away in white funerals on the wind. The Mexican boys ran away up the hill to their families. "Oh, strange, funny, strange," whispered Tom. "What?" said Ralph at his elbow. "Up in Illinois we've forgotten what it's all about. I mean the dead, up in our town. Tonight, heck, they're forgotten. Nobody remembers. Nobody cares. Nobody goes to sit and talk to them. Boy, that's lonely." "That's really sad, but here, why shucks, it's both happy and sad. It's all firecrackers and skeleton toys down here in the plaza. And up in that graveyard now are all the Mexican dead folks with the families visiting and flowers and candles and singing and candy. I mean, it's almost like Thanksgiving, huh? And everyone's sat down at dinner, but only half the people able to eat. And that's no mind. They're there. It's like holding hands at a seance with your friends, but some of the friends are gone." "Oh, heck, Ralph." "Yeah," said Ralph, nodding behind his mask. "Heck." "Look. Oh, look. Look there," said JJ. The boys looked. On top of a mound of white sugar skulls was one with the name Pipkin on it. Pipkin's sweet skull. But nowhere in all the explosions and dancing bones and flying skulls was there so much as one dust speck or whimper or shadow of Pep. They had grown so accustomed to Pip's leaping up in fantastic surprises on the sides of Notre Dame or weighted down in a gold sarcophagi that they had expected him, like a jack-in-the-box, to pop from a mound of sugar skulls, flap sheets in their face, cry dirges. But no, suddenly no Pip. No Pip at all. And maybe no Pip ever again. The boys shivered. A cold wind blew fog from the lake. That concludes chapter 18 and our episode for the evening, as we have just run out of time. Next week is part 6 and the final part of The Halloween Dream with Ray Bradbury. Yes. And it gets us right where we need to be. I'm very excited to conclude this with you, and it leads us right up to Halloween. I didn't even plan it this way. It just so happened to work out that way. I'm excited. Well, my dears, my dear creatures, have a lovely evening, and I will see you next Tuesday evening in the same time and approximately the same place. No, same place, approximately the same time. And as always, of course, stay spooky.